Chapter 1 of The Genial Idiot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nigel Boydell. The Genial Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. Chapter 1. He discusses maxims and proverbs. "Good!" cried the Idiot from behind the voluminous folds of the magazine section of his Sunday newspaper. "Here's a man after my own heart. Professor Duff of Glasgow University. He's come out with a public statement that the maxims and proverbs of our forefathers are largely hocus pocus and bunkum. I've always maintained that myself, from the moment I had my first copybook lesson in which I had to scrawl the line, 'It's a long lane that has no turning,' 24 times, and then that other absurd statement, 'A stitch in the side is worth two in the hand,' or something like it. I forget just how it goes. What tommy rot that is." "Well, I don't know about that, Mr. Idiot," said Mr. Whitechoker, tapping his fingers together reflectively. "Certainly great moral principles are instilled into the minds of the young by the old proverbs and maxims that remain with them forever, and become a potent influence in the formation of character." "I should like to agree with you, but I can't," said the Idiot. "I don't believe anything that is noble in the way of character was ever fostered by such a statement as that it's a long lane that has no turning. In the first place, it isn't necessarily true. I know a lane on my grandfather's farm that led from the hen coop to the barn. There wasn't a turn nor a twist in it, and I know by actual measurement that it wasn't 60 feet long. You've got just as much right to say to a boy that it's a long nose that has no twisting, or a long leg that has no pulling, or a long courtship that has no kissing. There is infinitely more truth in those last two than in the original model. The leg that's never pulled doesn't go short in a stringent financial market, and the courtship without a kiss, even if it lasted only 5 minutes, would be too long for any self-respecting lover." "I never thought of it that way," said Mr. Whitechoker. "Perhaps, after all, the idea is ill expressed in the original." "Perfectly correct," said the Idiot. "But even then what? Suppose they had put the thing right in the beginning and said, 'It's a long lane that has no ending.' What's the use of putting a thing like that in a copybook? A boy who didn't know that without being told ought to be spanked and put to bed. Why not tell him it's a long well that has no bottom, or a long dog that has no wagging, or a long railroad that has no terminal facilities?" "Oh, well," interposed the Bibliomaniac, "what's the use of being captious? Out of 1.5 billion wise saws you pick one out to jump on, because one is weak, and the rest must come down with a crash. There are plenty of others, and the way they refute one another is to me a constant source of delight," said the Idiot. "There's 'Procrastination is the thief of time,' for instance. That's a clear injunction to youth to get up and hustle, and he starts in with all the impulsiveness of youth, and the first thing he knows, bang, he runs slap into 'Look before you leap,' or 'Second thoughts are best.' That last is what Samuel Johnson would have called a beaut. What superior claims the second thought has over the first or the 77th thought that it should become axiomatic, I vow I can't see. If it's morality you're after, I'm dead against the teachings of that proverb. The second thought is the open door to duplicity when it comes to a question of morals. You ask a small boy, who's been in swimming when he ought to have been at Sunday school, why his shirt is wet. His first thought is naturally to reply along the lines of the fact and say, 'Why? Because it fell into the pond.' But the second thought comes along with visions of hard spanking and a supperless bed in store for him, and suggests the idea that 'there was a leak in the Sunday school roof right over the place where I was sitting,' or 'I sat down on the teacher's glass of water.' That's the sort of thing second thought does in the matter of morals. I admit, of course, that there are times when second thoughts are better than first ones. For instance, if your first thought is to name the baby Jimmy, and Jimmy turns out to be a girl, it is better to obey your second thought and call her Gladys or Samantha. But it is not always so, and I object to the nerve of the broad general statement that it is so. Sometimes fifth thoughts are best. In science, I guess you'll find that the man who thinks the 797th thought along certain lines has got the last and best end of it. And so it goes. Out of the infinitesimal number of numbers, every mother's son of 'em might, at the psychological moment, have a claim to supremacy. But your self-sufficient old proverb maker falls back behind the impenetrable wall of his own conceit, and announces that because he has nothing but second-hand thoughts, therefore the second thought is the best. And we, like a flock of sheep, follow this leader and go blatting that sentiment down through the ages as if it were a proverb beyond peradventure by the sum total of human experience. "Well, you needn't go mad about it," said the Lawyer. "I never said it, so you can't blame me." "Still, there are some proverbs," said Mr. Whitechoker blandly, "that we may not so summarily dismiss. Take, for instance, 'You never miss the water till the well runs dry.'" "One of the worst of the lot, Mr. Whitechoker," said the Idiot. "I've missed the water lots of times when the well was full as ever. You miss the water when the pipes freeze up, don't you? You, or rather I sometimes miss the water like time at 5 o'clock in the morning, after a pleasant evening with some jovial friends, when there's no end of it in the well, but not a drop within reach of my fevered hand, and I haven't the energy to grope my way downstairs to the ice pitcher. There's more water in that proverb than tangible assets. From the standpoint of veracity, that's one of the most immoral proverbs of the lot. And you come to apply it to the business world. Oh, Lud! As a rule, these days you never find the water till the well has been pumped dry and put in the hands of a receiver for the benefit of the bondholders. Fact is, all these water proverbs are to be regarded with suspicion." "I don't recall any other," said Mr. Whitechoker. "Well," said the Idiot, "there's one, and it's the nerviest of 'em all. Water never runs up hill. Ask any man in Wall Street how high the water has run up in the last 5 years and see what he tells you. And then, 'You may drive a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink,' is another choice specimen of the Waterbury school of philosophy. I know a lot of human horses who have been driven to water lately, and such drinkers as they have become. It's really awful. If I knew the name of that particular Maximilian who invented those water proverbs, I'd do my best to have him indicted for doing business without a license." "It's very unfortunate," said Whitechoker, "that modern conditions should so have upset the wisdom of the ancients." "It's too bad," said the Idiot, "and I'm just as sorry about it as you are. But, after all, the wisdom of the ancients, wise and wisdomatic as it was, should not be permitted to put at naught all modern thought. Why not adapt the wisdom of the ancients to modern conditions? You can't begin too soon, for the new generation are constantly springing up, and I know of no better outlet for reform than in these self-same Spencerian proverbs which the poor kids have to copy until they are sick and tired of them. Now, in the writing lessons, why not adapt your means to your ends? Why make a beginner in penmanship write over and over again, 'A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush,' which it isn't, by the way, to a man who is a good shot, when you can bear in on his mind that 'a dot on the I is worth two on the T'? Or for the instruction of your school teachers, why don't you get up a proverb like, 'It's a long lesson that has no learning'? Or if you are interested in having your boy brought up to the strenuous life, why don't you have him make 60 copies of the aphorism, 'A punch in the solar is worth 6 on the nose'? You tell your children never to whistle until they are out of the woods. Now, where in the name of all that's lovely should a boy whistle if not in the woods? That's where the birds whistle. That's where the wind whistles. If nature whistles anywhere, it is in the woods. Woods were made for whistling, and any man who ever sat over a big log fire in camp or in library who has not noticed that the logs themselves whistle constantly, well, he is a pachyderm. Well, as far as I can reach a conclusion from all that you have said, put in Mr. Whitechoker, the point seems to be that proverbs of the ancients are not suited to modern conditions, and that you think they should be revised. Exactly, said the Idiot. It's a splendid idea, said Mr. Brief, but after all, you've got to have something to begin on. Possibly, he added, with a wink at the Bibliomaniac, you have a few concrete examples to show us what can be done. Certainly, said the Idiot. Here is a list of them. And as he rose up to depart, he handed Mr. Brief a paper on which he had written as follows: You never find the water till the stock falls off 20 points. A stitch in time says nothing at all at present tailors' rates. You look after the pennies, somebody else will deposit the pounds. It is a long heiress that knows no yearning. Second thoughts are always second. Procrastination is the theme of gossips. Never put off today what you can put on day after tomorrow. Sufficient unto the day are the obligations of last month. One good swat deserves another. By Jove, said Mr. Brief as he read them off, you can't go back on any of them, can you? No, said the Bibliomaniac. That's the trouble with the Idiot. Even with all his idiocy, he's not always a perfect idiot. End of chapter 1. Genial Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nigel Boydell. Chapter 2. He discusses the ideal husband. Well, I see the ideal husband has broken out again, said the Idiot after reading a short essay on that interesting but rare individual by Gladys Waterbury Shrivelton of the women's page of the Squawhawket Gazoo. I'd hoped they had him locked up for good. He's been so little in evidence of late years. Why should you wish so estimable an individual to be locked up? Demanded Mr. Pedagog, who, somehow or other, seemed to take the Idiot's suggestion as personal. To keep his idealness from being shattered, said the Idiot. Nothing against the gentleman himself, I can assure you. It would be a pity, I think, once you have really found an ideal husband, to subject him to the coarse influences of the world, to let him go forth into the madding crowd and have the sweet idyllic bloom rubbed off by the attritions of the vulgar. I feel about the ideal husband just as I do about a beautiful peach-blow vase which is too fragile, too delicate to be brought into contact with the ordinary earthenware of society. The earthenware isn't harmed by bumping into the peach-blow, but the peach-blow will inevitably turn up with a crack here and a nick there and a hole somewhere else after such an encounter. If I were a woman and suddenly discovered that I had an ideal husband, I think at my personal sacrifice I'd present him to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or immure him in some other retreat where his perfection would remain forever secure, say up among the Egyptian mummies of the British Museum. We cannot be too careful, Mr. Pedagog, of these rarely beautiful things that are now and again vouchsafed to us. What is an ideal husband, anyhow? Asked Mr. Brief. Has the recipe for such an individual at last been discovered? Yes, put in Mrs. Pedagog before the Idiot had chance to reply, and here the dear old landlady fixed her eyes firmly and affectionately upon her spouse, the schoolmaster. I can tell you the recipe for the ideal husband. Years, 63, 62, my dear, smiled Mr. Pedagog, and, a fraction verging on 63. Years verging on 63, said Mrs. Pedagog, accepting the correction. Character developed by time and made secure. eyes blue, disposition when vexed, vexatious, disposition when pleased, happy, irritable from just cause, considerate always, calm exterior, heart of gold, prompt in anger and quick in forgiveness, and only one old woman in the world for him. A trifle bald-headed, but a true friend when needed, eh? Said the Idiot. I try to be, said Mr. Pedagog, pleasantly complacent. Well, you succeeded in both, said the Idiot. For the trifling baldness is evident when you remove your hat, which, like a true gentleman, you never fail to do at the breakfast table, and, after 15 years' experience with you, I, for one, can say that I have found you always the true friend when I needed you. I never told how, without my solicitation and entirely upon your own initiative, you once loaned me the money to pay Mrs. Pedagog's bill, over which she was becoming anxious. John, cried Mrs. Pedagog severely, did you ever do that? Well, my dear, only once, you know, and you were so relieved, began Mr. Pedagog. You should have lent the money to me, John, said Mrs. Pedagog, and then I should not have been compelled to dun the Idiot. I know, my dear, but you see I knew the Idiot would pay me back, and perhaps, well, only perhaps, my love, you might not have thought of it, explained the schoolmaster with a slight show of embarrassment. The ideal husband is ever truthful, too, said the landlady, with a smile as broad as any. Well, it's too bad, I think, said the lawyer, that a man has to be verging on 63 to be an ideal husband. I'm only 44, and I should hate to think that if I should happen to get married within the next 2 or 3 years, my wife would have to wait at least 15 years before she could find me all that I ought to be. Moreover, I've been told that I have black eyes. With the unerring precision of a trained legal mind, said the Idiot, you have unwittingly put your finger on the crux of the whole matter, Mr. Brief. Mrs. Pedagog has been describing her ideal husband, and I am delighted to know that what I have always suspected to be the case is in fact the truth, and her husband, in her eyes, is an ideal one. That's the way it ought to be, and that is why we have always found her the sweetest of landladies. But because Mrs. Pedagog prefers Mr. Pedagog in this race for supremacy in the domain of a woman's heart is no reason why you, who are only bald-headed in your temper, like most of us, should not prove to be equally the ideal of some other woman, in fact, of several others. Women are not alike. As a matter of fact, a gentleman named Balzac, who was the Marie Corelli of his age in France, once committed himself to the inference that no two women ever were alike, so that, if you grant the truth of old Balzac's inference, the ideal husband will probably vary to the extent of the latest count of the number of women in the world. So why give up hope because you're only 49? 44, corrected the lawyer. Pardon me, 44, said the Idiot. When you are in your roaring 40s, 5 or 6 years more or less do not really count. Lots of men who are really only 42 behave like 60, and I know one old duffer of 49 who has the manners of 18. The age question does not really count. No, you are proof of that, said the bibliomaniac. You have been 24 years old for the last 15 years. Thank you, Mr. Bib, said the Idiot. You are one of the few people in the world who really understand me. I have tried to be 24 for the past 15 years, and if I have succeeded, so much the better for me. It's a beautiful age. You feel that you know so much when you're 24. If it should turn out to be the answer to, "How old is Anne?" the lady should be congratulated. But as a matter of fact, you can be an ideal husband at any old age. Humph! At 7, for instance, drawled the Brief. 7 is not any old age, retorted the Idiot. It is a very certain old youth. Nor does it depend upon the colour of the eyes, so long as they are neither green nor red. Nobody could ever make an ideal husband out of a green-eyed man or a chap given to the red eye either. It all depends upon the kind of man you are, eh? said the Bibliomaniac. Not a bit of it, said the Idiot. It depends on the kind of wife you've got, and that's why I say that the ideal husband varies to the extent of the latest count of the women in the world. Take the case of Mr. Pedagog here. Mrs. Pedagog accuses him of being an ideal husband, and he, without any attempt at evasion, acknowledges the corn, like the honourable gentleman he is. But can you imagine Mr. Pedagog being an ideal husband to some lady in the 400 with a taste for grand opera that strikes only on the box, with a love for Paris gowns that are worth a fortune, with the midnight supper and cotillion after a habit firmly entrenched in her character, with an ambition to shine all summer in Newport, all autumn in Lenox, all winter in New York, with a dash to England and France in the merry, merry springtime? Do you suppose our friend John Pedagog here will be in it with Tommy Goldilocks Van Varick as the ideal husband of such a woman? Not on your life. Well, then, take Tommy Goldilocks Van Varick, who'd be the ideal spouse of this brilliant social light, Mrs. Van Varick. How would he suit Mrs. Pedagog, rising at 11:30 every day and yelling like mad for the little blue bottle which clears the head from the left-over cobwebs of yesterday, eating his egg and drinking his coffee with a furrow in his brow almost as deep as the pallor of his cheeks, and now and then making most awful grimace because the interior of his mouth feels like a bargain day at the fur counter of a department store, spending his afternoons sitting in the window of the hunky-dory club, ogling the passers-by and making bets on such important questions as whether more hansoms pass up the avenue than down, or whether the proportion of red-haired girls to white horses is as great between 3 and 4 p.m. as between 5 and 6. I don't see how a woman could stand a man like that, said Mrs. Pedagog. Indeed, I don't see where this ideal quality comes in anyhow, Mr. Idiot. I think you are wrong in putting him amongst the ideal husbands, even for Mrs. Van Varick. No, I am not wrong, for he is indeed the very essence of her ideal because he doesn't make her stand him, said the Idiot. He never bothers Mrs. Van Varick at all. On the first of every month he sends her a cheque for a good round sum with which she can pay her bills. He presents her with a town house and a country house and a limousine car and all the furs she can possibly want, provides her with an opera box, and never fails, when he himself goes to the opera, to call upon her and pay his respects like a gentleman. If she sustains heavy losses at bridge, he makes them good, and when she gives a dinner to her set, or to some distinguished social lion from the zoos, Van Varick is always on hand to do the honours of the house, and what is supposed to be his table. He and Mrs. Van Varick are on the most excellent terms. In fact, he treats her with more respect than he does any other woman he knows, never even suggesting the idea of a flirtation with her. In other words, he does not interfere with her in any way, which is the only kind of man in the world she could be happy with. It's perfectly awful, cried Mrs. Pedagog. If they never see each other, what on earth did they ever get married for? Protection, said the Idiot. It is perfectly splendid in its results. Mrs. Van Varick, being married to so considerate an absentee, is able to go about very much as she pleases, backed with the influence and affluence of the Van Varick name. This, as plain little Miss Floyd Postlethwaite, she was unable to do. She has now an assured position, and is protected against the chance of marrying a man who, unlike Van Varick, would growl at her expenditures, object to her friends, and insist upon coming home to dinner every night, and occasionally turn up at breakfast. Sweet life, said the Bibliomaniac. And what does the Willie-boy husband get out of it? Pride, protection, and freedom, said the Idiot. He's as proud as Punch when he sees Mrs. Van V. swelling about town with her name kept a standing matter in every society column in the country. His freedom he enjoys just as she enjoys hers. If he does turn up every 6 weeks, she never asks any questions, and so Van Varick can live on easy terms with the truth. If he sits up all night over a game of cards, there's nobody to chide him for doing so, and... But where does his protection come in? "That's what I can't see," said the Bibliomaniac. "It's as plain as a pikestaff," said the Idiot. "With Mrs. Van Varick on the tapis, Tommy is safe from designing ladies who might marry him for his money." "Well, he's a mighty poor ideal," cried Mr. Pedagog. "He certainly would not do for Mrs. Pedagog," said the Idiot. "But you would yourself be no better for Mrs. Van Varick. The Red Indian makes an ideal husband for the squaw, but he'd never suit a daughter of the British nobility any more than the Duke of Lacklands would make a good husband for the dusky little Minnehaha. So I say what's the use of discussing the matter any further with the purpose of arbitrarily settling on what it is that constitutes an ideal husband. We may all hope to be considered such if we only find the girl that likes our particular kind." "Then," said Mr. Brief with a smile, "your advice to me is not to despair, eh?" "That's it," said the Idiot. "I wouldn't give up if I were you. There's no telling when some one will come along to whom you appear to be the perfect creature." "Good!" cried Mr. Brief. "You are mighty kind. I don't suppose you can give me a hint as to how soon I may expect to meet the lady?" "Well, no, I can't," said the Idiot. "I don't believe even Edison could tell you about when to look for an arrival from Mars." Chapter 3. Genial Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nigel Boydell. Chapter 3. The Idiot's Valentine. "Well, old man," said the Poet as the Idiot entered the breakfast room on the morning of Valentine's Day, "how did old St. Valentine treat you? Any results worth speaking of?" "Oh, the usual layout," returned the Idiot languidly. 942 passionate declarations of undying affection from unknown lady friends in all parts of the civilized world. 1,324 highly colored but somewhat insulting intimations that I had better go way back and sit down from hitherto unsuspected gentlemen friends scattered from Maine to California. One small can of salt marked "St. Valentine to the Idiot," with sundry allusions to the proper medical treatment of the latter's freshness, and a small box containing a rubber bottle stopper labeled "Cork up and bust." I can't complain. "Well, you did come in for your share of it, didn't you?" said the Brief. "Yes," said the Idiot. "I think I got all that was coming to me, and I wouldn't have minded if I hadn't had to pay $3 overdue postage on 'em. I don't bother much if some anonymous chap offering the wiles of Calicajude takes the trouble to send me a funny picture of a monkey grinding a hand organ with 'the loving regards of your brother,' or if somebody else, who is afraid of becoming too fond of me, sends me a horse chestnut with a line to the effect that here is one I haven't printed. I don't feel like getting mad. But when I have to pay the postage on the plaguey things, it strikes me it is rubbing it in a little too hard. And if I could find 2 or 3 of the senders, I'd spend an hour or 2 of my time banging their heads together." "I got off pretty well," said the Bibliomaniac. "I only got one Valentine, and though it cast some doubt upon the quality of my love for books, I found it quite amusing. I will read it to you." Here the Bibliomaniac took a small paper from his pocket and read the following lines: "The Hungry Bibliomaniac. If only you would cut your books as often as your butter. When people ask you what's inside, you wouldn't sit and sputter. The reading that has made you full, the reading that doth chain you, is not from books or women's looks, but fresh from off the menu." "What do you think of that?" asked the Bibliomaniac with a chuckle, as he folded up his valentine and stowed it away in his pocket once more. "I think I can spot the sender," said the Idiot, fixing his eyes sternly upon the Poet. "It takes genius to get up a rhyme like 'men' and 'chain you,' and I know of only one man at this board or at any other who is equal to the task." "If you mean me," retorted the Poet, flushing, You are mightily mistaken. I wouldn't waste a rhyme like that on a personal valentine when I could tack it on the end of a sonnet and go out and sell it for $2.50. Then you didn't do it, eh? Demanded the Idiot. No, did you? Asked the Poet, with his eyes twinkling. Sir, said the Idiot, if I'd done it, would I have had the unblushing effrontery to say, as I just now did say, that its author was a genius? Well, we're square anyhow, said the Poet. You cast me under suspicion to begin with, and it was only fair that I should whack back. I got a valentine myself, and I suspect it was from the same hand. It runs like this. To the Minor Poet. You do not pluck the fairy flowers that bloom on high Parnassus, nor do you gather thistles like some of those mystic asses who browse about old Helicon in hope to fill their tummies. Yours rather are those dandelions, gilt-topped chrysanthemummies, quite pleasant stuff that ends in fluff, yet when they are beholden, make all the world look golden. Well, ejaculated the Idiot, I don't see what there is in that makes you angry. Seems to me there's some very nice compliments in that. For instance, your stuff when 'tis beholden makes all the world look golden. According to your anonymous correspondent, if he'd been vicious it might have said something like, withal so supercilious, they make the whole earth bilious. The Poet grinned. I'm not complaining about it. It's a mighty nice little verse, I think, and my only regret is that I do not know who the chap was who sent it. I'd like to thank him. I had an idea you might help me, he said, with a searching glance. I will, said the Idiot. If the man who sent you that ever reveals his identity to me, I will tell him you fell all over yourself with joy on receiving his tribute of admiration. How did you come out, Doctor? Oh, he remembered me all right, said the Doctor. Quite in the same vein, too, only he's not so complimentary. He calls me the Human Surgeon, and runs into rhyme after this fashion. Oh, Dr. Blank's a surgeon bold, a surgeon most humane, sir, and what he does is e'er devoid of ordinary pain, sir. If he were called to amputate a leg hurt by a bullet, he wouldn't take a knife and cut, but with his bill he'd pull it. He must have had some experience with you, Doctor, said the Idiot. In fact, he knows you so well that I am inclined to think that the writer of that valentine lives in this house, and it is just possible that the culprit is seated at this table at this moment. I think it very likely, said the Doctor dryly. He's a fresh young man, 5 feet 10 inches in height. Pooh-pooh, said the Idiot. That's the worst description of Mr. Brief I ever heard. Mr. Brief, in the first place, is not a young man, and he isn't fresh. I didn't mean Mr. Brief, said the Doctor significantly. Then you ought to be ashamed of yourself to intimate that Mr. Whitechoker, a clergyman, will stoop to the writing of such a rhyme as that, cried the Idiot. People nowadays seem to me to be utterly lacking in that respect for the cloth to which it is entitled. Mr. Brief, if you really wrote that thing, you owe it to Mr. Whitechoker to own up and thus relieve him of the suspicion the Doctor has so unblushingly cast upon him. I can prove an alibi, said the Lawyer. I could no more turn a rhyme than I could play Parsifal on a piano with one finger. And I wouldn't if I could. I judge from what I know of the market value of poems these days that valentine of the Doctor's is worth about $2. It would take me a century to write it, and inasmuch as my time is worth at least $5 a year, it stands to reason that I would not put in $500 worth of effort on a $2 job. So that lets me out. By the way, I got one of those trifles myself. Want to hear it? I'm just crazy to hear it, said the Idiot. If any man has reduced you to poetry, Mr. Brief, he's a great man. With all your many virtues, you seem to me to fit into a poetical theme about as snugly as an automobile with full power in a china shop. By all means, let us have it. This modern St. Valentine of ours has reduced the profession to verse with a nicety that elicits my most profound admiration," said Mr. Brief. "Just listen to this: "The lawyer is no wooer, yet to sue us is his whim. The lawyer is no tailor, but we get our suits from him. The longest thing in all the world they are the lawyer's briefs, and all the joys he gets in life are other people's griefs. Yet spite of all the lawyer's faults, he's one point rather nice: he'll not remain lest you retain, and never gives advice." "The author of these valentines," said the Doctor, "is to be spotted the way I diagnose the case, by his desire that professional people should be constantly giving away their services. He objects to the doctor's bills, and he slaps sarcastically at the lawyer because he doesn't give advice. That's why I suspect the Idiot. He's a professional idiot, and yet he gives his idiocy away." "When did I ever give myself away?" demanded the Idiot. "You are talking wildly, Doctor. The idea of your trying to drag me into this thing is preposterous. Suppose you show down your valentine and see if it is in my handwriting." "Mine is typewritten," said the Doctor. "So is mine," said the Bibliomaniac. "Mine too," said the Poet. "Same here," said Mr. Brief. "Well, then," said the Idiot, "I'm willing to write a page in my own hand without any attempt to disguise it, and let any handwriting expert decide as to whether there is the slightest resemblance between my chirography and these typewritten sheets you hold in your hand." "That's fair enough," said Mr. Whitechoker. "Besides," persisted the Idiot, "I've received one of the things myself, and it'll make your hair curl if you've got any. Typewritten like the rest of 'em. Shall I read it?" By common consent the Idiot read the following: "Idiot, zany, brain of a hare, dolt and noodle past compare, bunkum bosh and verbal slosh, mind of nothing, full of josh, madman, donkey, dizzard pate, US Zero syndicate, dull, depressing lack of wit, incarnation of the nit, minus numbskull, driveling baby, greenhorn dunce and dotard gaby, all the queer and loony chorus found in Roget's Thesaurus, flat and crazy through and through, that, oh idiot, that is you. Let me tell you, sir, in fine, I won't be your Valentine." "What do you think of that?" asked the Idiot, when he'd finished. "Wouldn't that jar you?" "I think it's perfectly horrid," said Mrs. Pedagog. "Mary, pass the pancakes to the Idiot. Mr. Idiot, let me hand you a full cup of coffee. John, and the Idiot the syrup. Why, how a thing like that should be allowed to go through the mails passes me." And the others all agreed that the landlady's indignation was justified, because they were fond of the Idiot in spite of his faults. They would not see him abused at any rate. "Say, old man," said the Poet later, "I really thought you sent those other valentines until you read yours." "I thought you would," said the Idiot. "That's the reason why I worked up that awful one on myself. That relieves me of all suspicion." End of chapter 3. Of the Genial Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Nigel Boydell. Chapter 4. He discusses finance. A messenger had just brought a collect telegram for the Doctor, and that gentleman, after going through all his pockets and finding nothing but a bunch of keys and a prescription pad, made the natural inquiry: "Anybody got a quarter?" "I have," said the Idiot. "One of the rare mintage of 1903, circulated for a short time only, and warranted good as new." "I didn't know the 1903 quarter was rare," said the Bibliomaniac, who prided himself on being a numismatist of rare ability. "Who told you the 1903 quarter was rare?" "My old friend Experience," said the Idiot.
"What's rare about it?" demanded the bibliomaniac. "Why, it's what they call ready money, spot cash, the real thing with the water squeezed out, selling at par on sight," explained the Idiot. "Millions of people never saw one, and under modern conditions it is very difficult to amass them in any considerable quantity. What is worse, even if you happen to get one of them, it is next to impossible to hang on to it without unusual effort. If you have a 1903 in your pocket, somehow or other the idea that it is in your possession seems to communicate itself to others, and every effort is made to lure it away from you on some pretext or other." "Excuse me for interrupting this lecture of yours, Mr. Idiot," said the Doctor amiably, "but would you mind lending me that quarter to pay this messenger? I've left my change in my other clothes." "What did I tell you?" cried the Idiot triumphantly. "The words are no sooner out of my mouth than they are verified. Hardly a minute elapses from the time Dr. Capsule learns that I have the quarter before he puts in an application for it." "Well, I renew the application in spite of its rarity," laughed the Doctor. "It's even rarer with me than it is with you. Shell out, there's a good chap." "I will if you'll put up $1 for security," said the Idiot, extracting the coin from his pocket, "and give me a demand note at 30 days for the quarter." "I haven't got $1," said the Doctor. "Well, what other collateral have you to offer?" asked the Idiot. "I won't take buckwheat cakes or muffins or your share of the sausages, mind you. They come under the head of Wildcat Securities, here today and gone tomorrow." "My, but you're a Shylock!" ejaculated Mr. Brief. "Not a bit of it," retorted the Idiot. "If I were Shylock I'd be willing to take a stake for security. But there's none of the pound of flesh business about me. I simply proceed cautiously, like any modern financial institution that intends to stay in the ring for more than 2 weeks. I'm not one of your fortnightly trust companies with an oak table, an unpaid bill for office rent, and a patent reversible disappearing president for its assets. I do business on the national bank principle. Millions for the rich, but not 1 cent for the man that needs the money." "I'll tell you what I'll do," said the Doctor. "If you lend me that quarter I won't charge you a cent for my professional services next time you need them." "That's a large offer, but I'm afraid of it," replied the Idiot. "It partakes of the nature of a speculation. It's dealing in futures, which is not a safe thing for a financial institution to do, I don't care how solid it is. You don't catch the Chemistry National Bank lending money to anybody on mere prospects, and, what is more, in my case I'd have to get sick to win out. No, Doctor, that proposition does not appeal to me." "Looks hopeless, doesn't it?" said the Doctor. "Mary, tell the boy to wait while I run upstairs." "I wouldn't do that," said the Idiot, interrupting. "The matter can be arranged in another way. I honestly don't like to lend money, believing with Polonius that it's a bad thing to do. As the Governor of North Carolina said to the Governor of South Carolina, who owed him $100, it's a long time between payments on account, and that sort of thing breaks up families, not to mention friendships. But I will match you for it." "How can I match when I haven't got anything to match with?" said the Doctor, growing a trifle irritable. "You can match your credit against my quarter," said the Idiot. "We can make it a mental match, a sort of Christian Science gamble. What am I thinking of? Heads or tails?" "Heads," said the Doctor. "By Jove, that's hard luck," ejaculated the Idiot. "You lose. I was thinking of tails." "Oh, thunder!" cried the Doctor impatiently. "Try it again. Double or quits. What am I thinking of?" said the Idiot. "Heads," replied the Doctor. "Somebody must have told you. Heads it is. You win. We're quits, Doctor," said the Idiot. "But I'm still without the quarter," the physician observed. "Yep," said the Idiot, "but there's one more way out of it. I'll buy the telegram from you. COD." "Done," said the Doctor, holding out the message. "Here's your goods." "And there's your money," said the Idiot, tossing the quarter across the table. "If you want to buy this message back at any time within the next 60 days, Doctor, I'll give you the refusal of it without extra charge." And he folded the paper up and put it away in his pocketbook. "Do the banks really ask for so much security when they make a loan?" asked the Poet. "Hear him, will you?" cried the Idiot. "There's your lucky man. He's never had to face a bank president in order to avoid the cold glances of the grocer. No cashier ever asked him how many times he'd been sentenced to state prisons before he'd discount his note. Do they ask security? Security isn't the name of it. They demand a blockade, establish a quarantine. They require the would-be debtor to build up a wall as high as Chimborazo and as invulnerable as Gibraltar between them and the lost before they will part with a dime. Why, they wouldn't discount a note to his own order for Andrew Carnegie for 17 cents without his endorsement. Do they ask for security?" "Well, I didn't know," said the Poet. "I never had anything to do with banks except a small depositor in the savings bank." "Fortunate man," said the Idiot. "I wish I could say as much. I borrowed $500 once from a bank, and what the deuce do you suppose they did?" "I don't know," said the Poet. "What?" "They made me pay it back," said the Idiot mournfully, "although I needed it just as much when it was due as when I borrowed it. The cashier was a friend of mine, too. But I got even with 'em. I refused to borrow another cent from their darned old institution. They lost my custom then and there. If it hadn't been for that inconsiderate act I should probably have gone on borrowing from them for years, and instead of owing them nothing today as I do, I should have been their debtor to the tune of $2,000 or $3,000. "Don't you take any stock in what the Idiot tells you in that matter, Mr. Poet," said Mr. Brief. "The national banks are perfectly justified in protecting themselves as they do. If they didn't demand collateral security, they'd be put out of business in 15 minutes by people like the Idiot, who consider it a hardship to have to pay up." As the lady said when she was asked the name of her favorite author, "Pshaw!" retorted the Idiot. "Likewise fudge. A whole panful of fudges. I don't object to paying my debts. Fact is, I know of no greater pleasure. What I do object to is the kind of collateral the banks demand. They always want something a man hasn't got and, in most cases, hasn't any chance of getting. If I had $1,000 bond I wouldn't need to borrow $500. Yet when I go to the bank and ask them for $500, the $1,000 bond is what they ask for." "Not always," said Mr. Brief. "If you can get your note endorsed, you can get the money." "That's true enough, but fellows like myself can't always find a captain of industry who is willing to take a long shot to do the endorsing," said the Idiot. "Besides, under the endorsement plan you merely ask another man to be responsible for your debt, and that isn't fair. The whole system is wrong. Every man to his own collateral, I say. Give me the bank that will lend money to the chap that needs it on the security of his own product. Mr. Whitechoker, say, is short on cash and long on sermons. My style of bank would take one barrel of his sermons and salt 'em down in the Safe Deposit Company as security for the money he needs. The Poet here, finding the summer approaching and not a cent in hand to replenish his wardrobe, should be able to secure an advance of $200 or $300 on his sonnets, rondeaux, and lyrics. $1 for each 2½ sonnet, and so on. The grocer should be able to borrow money on his dried apples, his vinegar pickles, his canned asparagus, and other non-perishable assets such as dog biscuits, Roquefort cheese, and California raisins. The tailor seeking an accommodation of $500 should not be asked how many times he has been sentenced to jail for arson, and required to pay in 10,000 shares of steel common in order to get his grip on the currency, but should be approached appropriately and asked how many pairs of trousers he is willing to pledge as security for the loan." "I don't know where I would come in on that proposition," said the Doctor. "There are times when we physicians need money, too." "Pooh!" said the Idiot. "You are not a non-producer. It doesn't take a very smart doctor these days to produce patients, does it? You could assign your cases to the bank. One little case of hypochondria alone ought to be sufficient guarantee of a steady income for years, properly managed. If you haven't learned how to keep your patients in such shape that they have to send for you 2 or 3 times a week, you'd better go back to the medical school and fit yourself for your real work in life. You never knew a plumber to be so careless of his interests as to clean up a job all at once. And what the plumber is to the household, the physician should be to the individual. Same way with Mr. Brief. With the machinery of the law in its present shape, there is absolutely no excuse for a lawyer who settles any case inside of 15 years, by which time it is reasonable to suppose his clients will get into some new trouble that will keep him going as a paying concern for 15 more. There isn't a field of human endeavor in which a man applies himself industriously that does not produce something that should be a negotiable security.
"How about burglars?" queried the Bibliomaniac.
"I stand corrected," said the Idiot. "The burglar is an exception, but then he is an exception also at the banks. The expert burglar very seldom leaves any security for what he gets at the banks, and so he isn't affected by the situation one way or the other."
"Oh, well," said Mr. Brief, rising, "it's only a pipe dream all the way through. They might start in on such a proposition, but it would never last. When you went in to borrow $15, putting up your idiocy as collateral, the emptiness of the whole scheme would reveal itself."
"You never can tell," observed the Idiot. "Even under the present system the banks have done worse than that."
"Never!" cried the Lawyer.
"Yes, sir," replied the Idiot. "Only the other day I saw in the papers that a bank out in Oklahoma had loaned a man $10,000 on 60,000 shares of Hot Air Preferred."
"And is that worse than idiocy?" demanded the Brief.
"Infinitely," said the Idiot. "If a bank lost $15 on my idiocy, it would be out $9,985 less than that Oklahoma institution is on its hot air loan."
"Bosh! What's hot air worth in the exchange today?"
"As a selling proposition, zero and commissions off," said the Idiot. "Fact is, they've changed its name. It is now known as International Knitting." End of chapter 4.